Welcome to what I'm calling the VR Creator Podcast. And my guest today is Franco. He's actually one of the students in my VR Creator Academy course. And then you also do architecture and stuff. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for the intro, Justin. My name's Franco. On my Discord, it's known as Billy Mayonnaise, which is a pretty ridiculous name, but
It's so
who doesn't have
memorable.
ridiculous names in Discord? But yeah, so a bit of backstory. I'm a 23-year-old fresh out of college, so I did physical architecture as my studies. So most of the time you hear architecture, it's like digital code architecture, but no, mine's brick and stone. But I graduated recently, so I'm interested in design. I was interested in a lot of math. But I got into VR gaming about 2-3 years ago. I got an Oculus Rift, which is still down here underneath
Nice.
the bed. And I think maybe about a year ago, I got into Oculus Quest. And then around the end of October of last year, I was thinking of getting into game development. I mean, my childhood's pretty standard, a lot of video gaming when I was younger, but
Uh-huh.
then I started looking at it more objectively and I was like, you know what? I want to start making some games. I have some ideas, and some developers aren't doing the genres I'm interested in. So I wanted to take it upon myself to try doing some of them.
Very nice. So you've done, you haven't graduated yet, have you? Are you still in school
No, I
for?
have.
Oh,
No,
you
I
have?
have.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a year out of year out of college, so right now I'm just working at a firm in my city. But this is my hobby, my that I'm interested in doing at a downtime. So by my day, I think people in the uh, chat like to call it like their day job, and then their second identity is like a night owl
Yeah.
Unity developer. So I would call that what I'm doing.
That's basically how I got started. I mean, I was doing a like software engineering job, so it was a lot more overlap than I feel like you
Hmm.
have.
Yeah.
What made you are you more interested in like the design side of things or interested in like development?
I mean, I'd be interested in both. I guess design would come naturally to me because I was in more of like a creative field, but honestly a lot of the architectural work has to do with a lot of math, and coding like resonated with me. I guess it's a big hurdle to learn. But I've been going through the motions and starting to understand a lot of like terminology behind code. I guess it's more so because it feels like there's a sort of wall uh that you can hit with design in Unity before you need to get an understanding of code to actually implement your ideas into the game. So it's there's a bit of a reality check when you're doing Unity where you hit that wall and you realize that there's not much you can do aside from design before you have to start interjecting code to really make the projects come alive.
Right. Like it looks good, but now it doesn't do
Hmm.
anything. And so it becomes a lot
Yeah.
less interesting after that point. Yeah, you architecture is a weird mix between like technical expertise and also like being like an artist in
Hmm.
design and all that kind of stuff. That's a very unique group of people, I feel like.
You'd notice it too in Unity Learn on their website. There's a lot of courses that mention like if you're into the design field as an architect, Unity's still pretty useful for you, just for visualizing things like understanding how to input materials into Unity, to create scenes, lighting, rendering, just all of this in general to like make really high quality models for like clients. But yeah, it's a good overlap for getting into like game development and building your worlds.
Yeah, because I guess did you come from a platform like CAD and you got to,
Yep.
and then
Yep,
a
that's
lot
me.
of that
AutoCAD, Revit.
translates over to Unity, I feel like. I mean, you don't get the more like, design creation, like 3D modeling type of stuff,
Hmm.
but
You'd be surprised that I think a lot of the modeling software actually has the ability to export to Unity. It's just it'll export as one giant gray mesh. So
there you go.
that's where you got to learn a bit more.
Well, I guess you could bring like Pro Builder into Unity, and then that's almost CAD, like a little less technical
Hmm.
CAD version.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe like Blender geometry nodes, but that's a whole different. It's a whole different spaghetti plate of stuff compared to Unity.
Hmm. So you mentioned some games that weren't out there that you wanted to make. What are you like looking at, like trying to do in your hobby free time?
For hobby free time, I mean, one big genre that I don't think's been hit a lot in VR particularly, is like a very solid pirate game.
Ooh.
Like I've been interested in like pirate games. I guess just like it's an interesting genre. It's a lot of like lawlessness, a lot of like individuality for just being a pirate in that time. But
Right.
VR is that next evolution of like immersion into a game like that. Basically, what I want to do is just be able to do a sword fight with other people on a ship in VR. That's like the minimum.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
So that's and I say a minimum, but a minimum could be
At
like
that
3
point,
years developer
yeah,
time.
you're already at multiplayer game with
Yep.
some weird physics of being on a ship in an ocean. Uh,
Yep.
and then sword fighting, which is a whole like physics nightmare for
Mhm.
everything. Interesting. Okay. And so are you trying to like full on make a game and like release it and make some money off of it, or just kind of doing it for fun and you like architecture, you're gonna stay in architecture, that kind of thing?
I think right now it's definitely a hobby of mine. Architecture is my primary interest, but I think I feel confident enough where I could juggle both of them, especially because there's a good overlap between them. But I would probably focus on architecture for the short term, but long term, I do find VR game development a super interesting concept. Even if some of the projects don't come to fruition as like full published games, they could just come out as like um, games on like an itch.io page or something of just proof of concept of like, this is a possibility. So if we can build like this really nice complex level to just prove that the idea is possible, you already have a good basis to start a project in the future.
Right. And I feel like at this point, if you're learning VR, then even if you don't end up making that jump and doing full game development, the architecture world is going to eventually find VR in at some angle. Like I know there's already some apps where they're trying to get some like collaborative, like, and like in the videos, they have people building like structures and
Yeah,
collaborating
yeah.
in VR.
I think we have a VR headset in our office, but I don't know if it's a Oculus Quest or not.
Oh,
I could be
interesting.
the VR expert there until they come out with the Pro, and then I'll be confused again.
Yeah.
But
That's
who
the
knows?
cool part about the headset is like it's not like a you're like an Xbox or a PlayStation like game console.
Mm,
It's like eventually companies are gonna buy every single person in the company a VR headset.
hmm.
And so everyone's gonna have to know at least how to use VR, and then if you learn how to make VR, then that's a really good money making opportunity.
Yeah. Just be the ambassador for VR in my
Yeah,
office.
exactly. You'll just be the technical lead for VR or whatever app you end up using.
Yeah.
Make your own apps. So what have you found like the most difficult so far is like learning
Oh,
VR
let's
and like
see.
just VR development as a whole.
Let's see. VR development. Luckily, we VR seems to have just different player inputs, so a lot of stuff you learn from Unity in general is good to overlap into VR development. But the most difficult thing was absolutely code.
Hmm.
Because for me it was understanding syntax of code. There's a lot of resources online available, but every tutorial that you go through, then they start getting into a lot of the terminology of code that you just don't understand. Or even opening an asset, like in the asset store, you'll download one that you got on like a Black Friday sale from like those packs of 40, and you'll get a asset that you open up and try to read the code, and you have no clue how to move forward with it
Mm,
because it's just a jumble of code that you don't know. Like they're using new methods that Unity has that you haven't even heard about,
yeah.
and even the word method, like you wouldn't know much about it. Like what does that mean? Even though it's basically like an event that happens, but
Right. You
it's
just kind
just
of get
it's
thrown in
just
the deep
knowing
end.
that. Yeah, and coming from my experience, like getting into it a year ago, like I still consider myself a newcomer because it's a bunch of terminology and a bunch of practices in Unity that people excel at way more than I do. But it's just, day by day getting to understand more of code, I think was like the biggest hurdle of it.
Yeah, I feel like learning how to code is very similar to like how people learn like math, like complex math, like calculus or something. Is like you literally just
Mhm.
have to like do it over and over and over again, and then finally like something just clicks in your mind. It's like this
Hmm.
weird like mental block that you have, and you just do it enough times, and you're like, oh, that's like now all the pieces start to like fall together, and like I understand inheritance and classes and how they all work together and all those buzzwords.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, the and like that's one of the things that I like. That's why I added that whole section to my courses, because like a lot of people like wanted to get into game development, and like you can use assets and frameworks and stuff, but you still have to like at least understand how they function a little bit, even especially
Hmm.
if you want to like modify it a little bit. Like if you were gonna bring like Hurricane VR into your, then it would
Oh,
like.
don't even start with that one. That's exactly what this conversation's about. Because Hurricane VR for me was that asset. I
Oh,
bring
yep.
it in, a gigantic, impressive code made by a different developer, and I have no clue how to read it.
It's
And I'm
just
worried if I click
huge.
one wrong thing, it's gonna mess up a file.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of them say like, "Oh, like this is good for developers." AutoHand's actually I think pretty good because they use a lot of like
Hmm.
events. You can kind of you don't have to like change the code. You can just like listen to when things happen in their code. Um, yeah, a lot of like these big frameworks you bring in are just like tens of like or even hundreds of scripts that just come with it, and you're like, I don't know what to do with all of these.
Yep. I got to start building an index of them, basically.
Have you found a
Ev-
framework? Like, have you tried different frameworks, or has it just like been Hurricane?
I've so I own Auto Hand. I got Auto Hand first, and then I got Hurricane VR second. So I was able to get Auto Hand probably maybe like a month or two before your video came out for
Oh,
Auto
okay.
Hand. So I got to try it out like their tutorial level, the demo one. And it is impressive. Like basically the procedural hand generation of like grips
Mm.
across the map, and the your featured favorite, which is the
Yeah,
floating
that's
hand.
my favorite hand.
Um, so it's definitely impressive code, like from the developer standpoint, and then it's just a matter of like going through the demos and seeing how their code is easily inputted to your events in your game. But yeah, it's AutoHand first. I tried it out for maybe like a few days to a week, and then I was looking for something more Boneworks style,
Mm.
so I went towards Hurricane VR, which luckily was like a bundle of like their hand grip animations and then their actual kinematic physics engine
Oh
of
yeah.
like their character controller. So those two in conjunction looked really exciting. But those I think I only spent about 3 to 4 days looking at them. So it's a lot more to discover. But that was the asset that got me thinking like maybe I'm in over my head here. I should leave this alone for a second, learn code, and then come back. So I haven't come back to it yet. I still am learning code, but one of these days I will hop back into that asset and understand half of it.
Yeah, one of the like one of those frameworks is kind of just like to the point where you almost learn that like you learn the game engine, and then you're like, I'm
Hmm.
only ever going to use Hurricane VR for all of my VR projects in the future because it's the only framework I know, and like you just go with that, and then
Hmm.
like here's a sword, I want it to be able to be picked up, so I know the script that needs to go on to it, and
Yeah.
then how to hook everything up.
I mean, I'm surprised at how many different ways people manage to code it. Because I've been looking at video games basically now and like trying to break down how developers do it. Like
Yeah.
I can play I don't know. For all I know, it could be like Minecraft or like Elden Ring, and you have characters picking up objects and equipping them, and it's like, did they use a Boolean? Did they use an event and like parent the object to their hand? This is all Unity terminology and code terminology. See, this is like it's already ingrained into my
Yeah,
vocabulary
you're just thinking
when talking
logically.
about it. Yeah,
Yep.
so but it's a fun little pastime because you sort of look at games a little bit differently now. Um, but I'm not doing it so much where the games are like too analytical for me. I
It
also
is
still
fun to
play
kind of
normally.
like see behind the curtain a little bit when you're playing
Hmm.
games, and you like pick something up and you're like, "Ooh, I wouldn't have done that like that at all." Like
Yeah.
it's you're like, "Why would you code it like this?" Or like, why this interaction like, after you see some better ways to do things, you're like, "Oh, this is rough." But that's kind of the
Hmm.
problem with VR right now is like there's not a standard way to do anything right now. Like if you play a lot of like 2D games or like especially like shooters, like there is a very standard way like, you know, you walk over a gun, you press a button, you pick it up, and like you press the
Mhm.
same button to reload for every single game. Like there's like a very standardized like set of things that you do to interact with the world. But with VR, like everything's just kind of up in the air. Like nobody really knows the best way to do things. People forget about left-handed people, and so when you swap the controls, like everything's
Oh,
just backwards, and then like
yeah, that's true. It's just thinking about accessibility options from like a gamepad perspective to VR is like an entirely different thing.
yeah, so I'm left-handed, and so I'll like get into games and like almost immediately like swap over to like and like some games will only
Mhm.
like let you point with your right hand, and like I can do that. It's just like annoying, just because like I'm
Take
much more accurate with my left hand,
take
but
note, developers. We got left-handers here. All
exactly.
right.
And then I'll like swap it and they'll like swap the whole thing. So like now the movement control
Mhm.
that which I'm used to because I'm used to like an Xbox controller where you like move with your left and then you aim with your right. And
Mhm.
like in VR, like I just want to keep the same thumbsticks for those. But then with lefties, they'll like just swap the whole input. And so now I'm like moving and like making myself dizzy and
Yeah.
like it's interesting. So how far have you like gotten very far in your little pirate game? Are you like making
It's
assets or trying to get mechanics down or
I think right now it's going more the tutorial and lesson routes to build my knowledge on the code and general mechanics of Unity and code before I jump into the project. Right now, it's a large roster of games that I'm interested in making. Not very many that I've actually made yet because I want to get the basics down. Like
yeah.
as the newcomer, I want like all of this knowledge. I don't know where the ceiling is, but I know there's gonna be a ceiling where I feel like I know enough, and then I can start getting into the game development. But for the time being, my roster is more padded with projects from tutorials from other courses or from your course, um, and things like that.
Yeah. And I think those are good because a lot of like I don't know if you saw in the Discord today, even somebody was like, I want to make a multiplayer MMO in VR and
Hmm.
like
God,
no, you're
your dreams are possible, but you better know how to make the code for
you
it.
could do that after you've been making games for like 10 years, then you'll have enough like understanding to do something that complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like
Well,
making like doing very step by step incremental like tutorials, even like non VR ones. Like, have
mhm.
you done like non VR tutorials too, and like found those helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've most of the courses that I've found available right now that are like discounted were stuff about general 3D Unity design, because it still teaches you the fundamentals of Unity and code.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, for instance, with what your course is doing, is getting into the VR applications of Unity's development. But there's a strong overlap of how code is implemented. Maybe, for instance, a thing that's different is that in your course, it seems like it might be prioritizing the new input system, showing references of the old one, but trying the new input system out.
Yeah,
Which that one, a lot of older tutorials like to embrace the old input manager or the input
yeah, it's just
system because
easy to
it's
code.
yeah, it's easier to code and it's more it's to be honest, it's more structured and like more thought out because it's been here for longer than the new input system. But the change is very useful as well because it's starting to streamline different controller options with the new input system. So you
Yeah.
have opportunities there. It's just a lot of like getting through that big hurdle of learning the new method as opposed to the old one.
Yeah, it's like the main thing they're trying to do there is instead of pressing A to jump, you just like do a jump event. It like triggers the
Hmm.
jump event. So like no matter like you can link that event to any number of buttons. And so swapping an Xbox controller for a PS2 controller is like or a PS5 controller, PS2 controller. Goodness. I was thinking the
You're living in the
PSVR
past.
the VR2 PlayStation 1 is coming out soon. But yeah, being able to swap those over is easy. Um but yeah, that's like honestly the best course I've found is the GameDev.tv RPG
Hmm.
course. Have you gotten that one yet?
Yep.
It's
I have gotten the complete Unity 3D course. I have a separate course on expanding your code knowledge. And I actually at some point will undertake the RPG course
It's
and
huge.
ultimately drop it after like a year of development.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's like it's just gigantic, but it's really good because for one, right now it's on a Black Friday sale for like
mhm,
$30, which is wild. Um, but the whole course goes through like design patterns, so like they kind of assume you know a little bit of code, but you can get into the more advanced like here's actually how you structure a project in a game and like why you like how you break up individual scripts. So it's definitely a little complicated and intermediate to advanced, but the like if you can finish that one, like then you're set, you know how to make games.
I need optimism here, Justin. I'll get into it eventually.
You'll be able to get there. You just gotta do just like some really simple like C sharp like tutorials, I think, and just being
Mhm.
able to do those, and then like and making sure you're not just like doing the monkey see monkey do thing where you like watch the tutorial for 5 seconds and then you type in that same line and then you go back. It's kind of like you try to watch the whole lesson and then you swap over and try to do like as much as you can remember and you only like swap back, and so you're actually using your brain, and then
Mhm.
being able to like kind of tweak it and like okay, well like I see what they're doing here, and so I'm going to try to do the same thing but like to this little piece and like make it your own a little bit, kind of like stretches you and helps you figure out like what you actually need to what you are learning and what you like have kind of been like skimming and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the prime example for that was the input manager. A lot of the tutorials use the old system, and while they don't incentivize much of the new one because the old one's more stable, I thought, I'll undertake at least for one of my projects to try the new input system. So
Hmm.
then eventually I'll have questions to ask on Discord or questions to ask from any of the community members that might be able to help. But just having those questions and trying out the new input system and having those questions to ask is just great because it's just exposing me to a new idea that Unity has for input at least, and it's me at least experimenting with it to try to learn myself, just
Hmm.
challenge myself for it. So
Very nice. Yeah, you're pretty active in all the Discord and community stuff. The have you been how's the like design side of things been for you? Has that been a little bit easier where you've been able to do you like your own 3D models, or do you like buy them or modify them?
I would definitely do 3D or design 3D models more than I would purchase them, but I will say the asset store has some very enticing 3D
It
models.
is
I
nice.
could try making a normal you know, triangular roof house, and then I just hop over to the asset store and somebody made a multi-floor mansion. And I'm like, you know what? My little capsule character could love to live in that.
Yeah, it's kind
Just
of the
move to
point where
that
it's
one.
like you could do like probably a lot of what's on the asset store. Like in my brain, I'm like I could code that, like I could make that functionality. But then also if it's like $20, and otherwise I could spend like a whole week coding it, or I could just
Yeah.
spend $20 and I can have it now.
There's a beautiful word for that. It's called a business expense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at this point, now that I'm making money off the YouTube channel, I can just be like, oh
Yep.
yeah.
I'll just make it for a video and write it
Assets.
off.
As long as I use it in a video, yeah, we're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like the like all of like Cynthi's assets are like just super optimized and like nice. I think they even have like a pirate one probably.
Mhm.
And it's just like, oh, there's like hundreds of assets in here, and I can spend like $100, and me as someone who's not design like oriented at all, I have no idea how like to make things look good. I can just like copy a little demo scene and drop that in and then add my like functionality to it.
I mean, don't get me wrong. YouTube and the Asset Store and Unity Learn are like amazing resources for learning design aspect of stuff of Unity development because there's I think is it Blender Guru that does all the donut
Yeah.
videos. I think for one of his 1 million subscriber videos, he put like a million donuts on screen. I
Oh
think like
really? Yeah,
just
he's the donut
you know
guy.
exactly. So, if you wanna make a game entirely out of donuts, that's perfectly fine, but, you can also undertake those Unity or those Blender and other modeling program tutorials and just make things that are, like, out of people's minds of imagination because it's just we have that ability to learn from others.
Hmm. do you find yourself learning better when you like get a course or the just following like YouTube tutorials? How's that like comparison been?
As a newcomer, I've tried both. I would say with YouTube, some YouTubers do good with teaching a lot of basic materials, so like guiding you through from very beginner stuff. But it seems like a lot of YouTube videos are also made regarding particular scenarios in Unity that need to be resolved, whether it's like code or design, and they start using a lot of terms that you should know or have like a above average understanding or above beginner understanding of it. So the courses I would say are more of like a well structured way of learning Unity from a beginner perspective. But if price is ever an issue, don't ever be deterred from using YouTube because there are certain resources and like channels that do actually take you through the very beginning and teach you all of the terminology, teach you all of like the Unity in particular, like their window and like how you manage all of the different window components, the timeline, animation, rendering, hierarchy, inspector, all of these different windows. Like they'll just guide you through it.
Yeah, there's definitely like endless information just for free out there that you can like kind of
Mhm.
collect if you want and like bring together. But I have found like getting courses is nice because it's just like all right there for you and it walks you step by step
Mhm.
through it. Except for like the one-off YouTube videos, those are nice for like, how do I do
Yeah,
this? Help!
yeah, it's like, "This is the perfect answer. Please give me more," and it's a video from, like, 4 months ago, and it's like, I wonder if they'll respond to my YouTube comment if I
Yeah,
ask for a follow-up video.
yeah, like
I
this is
need a
perfect.
resolution for
Can you
this.
continue the series,
Yeah,
please?
posted 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you so stepping away from the development side of things, what's been your favorite like games to play in VR or like experiences?
Oh, definitely narrative games.
Okay.
There's the occasional sandbox, which is exciting. Blade and Sorcery is probably my top one, and that's heavily dependent on the mod community.
Mm.
The mod community has been insane with that game, so I would say for sandbox, Blade and Sorcery. But for narrative games, I think some I have on the list here were like Half-Life Alex, that I played. I really like the game a lot. There's Into the Radius, which I didn't play a
Ooh,
lot
that's a
of, but
good
I could
one.
already tell it was like a very exciting narrative game. You have Resident Evil, which is like a Quest exclusive, but it still has a lot of high rated reviews. And then you have other games that they have available, like on the Oculus Rift store or like the desktop app they have on Steam. Who knows if they'll have it on like Epic or even at like EA launchers, but it if it happens, then that it's good to see that like other companies are starting to embrace the VR industry in terms of games. But yeah, I would say narrative games were definitely an interesting one to me just because it's an added level of immersion to a story. It's a character
Okay.
you're connecting with, so you're already in the eyes and using the hands of that person. So you're basically making the decisions as that character.
Yeah. I've always found it so I love like the story games and I love like like making them and like playing through them, but then also like I also get bored so easy, so I find it so difficult to like finish out narrative
Yeah.
games. So I probably have like 90% of like just the single player like story driven games or like maybe one third to two thirds done in my like library.
You could redo the playthroughs on like a live stream and then just
Ah,
have
that's
like
true.
your Discord community just try to guide you through it.
That
Maybe
could be
just do like
fun.
a shared experience. But it's just those types of games I think are super interesting. And that probably means that you're the bar I'm set to convince like in terms of a narrative game. I'm like, all right, what story would keep Justin engaged? What story
Yeah,
would
because a
keep
lot of it's
people
like
like you engaged, you know?
yeah, especially like the VR games. I guess they're just very like step by step and like
Hmm.
I like all the like plot twisty like movies and whatnot. Like the ones where like at the end you're like, whoa, like now I have to go watch the whole thing again. Like
Yeah.
because I want to see all the little bits and pieces of the plot twist. Interesting. Yeah, I always like I want to. I try so hard and I'll like jump in and I'll like go through it and then I'm like,
Yeah.
ah, I just I don't know. I'll just go back and play Population
It's
One.
like my house is too cold. Maybe I just want to watch TV now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm surprised how much temperature impacts my interest in playing VR. If
It
it's
gets
too
very
cold in my house.
hot.
Mhm.
I get so hot. Like I have to have like a fan like directly on me whenever I'm playing VR.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are like that. It's like I don't know why it is. I guess like your head kind of radiates a lot of heat, and so like having the headset on, it kind of like blocks that. I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting. What else?
I know, yeah, it's a lot of planning for the podcast too. Is just a lot of questions, but um, I know you mentioned the thoughts of VR in the future, the idea of VR in
Yeah.
the future. So narrative games are something that I'm interested in terms of the gaming industry. Because there's a lot of talented developers and writers that bring stories to life through VR. In the professional sense, I'm very excited to see VR integrated into a lot of educational spaces because I think experiential um, tools using VR headsets will emerge once VR is put into a more of an educational oriented purpose. So you'll get, particularly history.
Mm.
Not to say that two children should be fighting as like gladiators or anything, but it would be cool to see like the Colosseum in
Right.
VR and have the teacher, teach you about the events that happen there. So I think it'd be something very exciting to see, like educational
Yeah, like
integration of it.
almost like Magic School Bus if you've ever seen that.
Oh, absolutely.
Where they just like go wherever. Also, I've something that I've noticed that I'm really excited for is so with like the eye and face tracking and everything,
Hmm.
and then like all these kind of like sensors that are coming into headsets, like heart rate, and like the HP Omnicept has like a cognitive load like sensor, or it's not necessarily like a sensor, but it's more of like a calculation, I guess, based on your heart rate and like how fast your eyes move and like all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff, and like bringing all that together to gauge like what's the emotion that the player is experiencing like as they're playing your game. And so this is something that would be cool for like story driven games, is being able to like gauge that emotion impact that you're having on the player
Hmm.
as they're going through the stories. Like if you're doing like a horror game and they're not scared enough, you can like make the like scene more scary and like get them to like a target heart rate or something.
All right, we're trying to keep people scared but healthy, Justin. All right, we're not
Exactly.
trying to send anyone to the hospital.
Well, it's like, and then you could do it the other way where you could like bring it down, like, okay, they're a little like, too scared. And so you bring
Yeah.
it like back a little bit and kind of like have a little pause. And so being able
Hmm.
to like almost predict what emotion your player is experiencing and like either like driving that home or like bringing them like transitioning them to like a better state.
Yeah. You've scared someone. Are you happy about that? Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's like, all
exactly.
right, we don't want this person playing anymore.
The developer just has like a stat column of like how many people they've scared.
Yep.
How many people are currently in my game terrified?
It's like one person's super happy. All right, let's go talk to him.
Oh no.
What's going on here?
So what's been your like favorite part of VR so far?
Ooh, good question.
You have like it could
Let's
be like a
see.
particular experience. It could be just kind of like a overall like element of VR that you like.
Uh, I'd say an element for VR as an aspect of being more immersed into the game, it's having a lot more of like full body experiences like
Yeah.
in VR. You're not just crouching down. You're actively fighting for your virtual life in
Yeah.
certain games. So you do things that, from a person outside the headset looking towards you would look completely ridiculous as you're yelling like get to cover or I'm going to die and you're just like crouched down on the ground. They'll probably question you a little bit, but it's just getting to be more active in VR
Mm,
compared to certain like regular TV 3D games because you're really into it. Like Beat Saber, you got a pretty passionate like cardio community. For instance, in Beat Saber, you got people playing like expert plus playlists of songs that don't have fail or have fail conditions, so you have to be absolutely perfect, and that requires even
Mm.
more specific precisional movements. So you have that like fog of sweat on your face because you've played like an hour and a half of music. You have Blade and Sorcery, as mentioned before. You have that game. You're just that's the gladiatorial one,
Yeah.
where you're sword fighting and you're just making these crazy moves and hoping the game doesn't glitch out, but you're feeling what it's like to like fight with a sword just without the weight of the sword and the fear of being hurt.
Right.
But it's that I'd say that's what it is. It's definitely immersion in the sense that you're getting more of an active workout because you're either terrified or you're either fighting for your life or you're fighting to the rhythm of a song. So,
Yeah, Super Hot's one of my like favorite games to introduce people who are new to VR into,
mhm.
because it's like you don't have to move around, so it's just like you're sitting there and then like you move your hands, and that's like the whole game. And
Yeah.
I've like had people just like on the ground trying to like kick the bad guys because they're just like so deeply immersed into
Uh,
it. Like there's a dent in my fridge because someone's punched it so hard.
oh,
It's
don't even get started on what's the game? The one with the plank where you
Oh, yeah,
walk in the
Richie's,
middle? That
Plank
one.
Experience.
If anyone wants to see an interesting community, visit r/VR to ER. It's a very dark title, but it's just compilations of people forgetting they're in virtual reality. It's on
Mm,
Reddit, but
and they just, like,
it's
face plant onto the
unfortunately hilarious videos. Yes,
it's like America's Funniest Home Videos, but
yeah.
specifically for VR.
Oh, that's not a bad idea either.
Yeah, that would be funny. Alright, well, how about the other end? Do you have, like, a what do you think should be improved in VR some more?
For improvement in VR, there's some tech that's going into it, but I'd say, I guess the immersion in terms of like haptic feedback, or I guess sort of some events. I This is a role that developers can take, but the sort of disconnect for certain developed VR games where there's some actions that we're just not able to recreate effectively into a game, so it sort of disconnects the player from it. So there's some games that I could play and a cutscene plays, but instead of me being in the cutscene, it's just a sort of curved screen
Oh.
in front of me, which sort of disassociates you from the game. And I mean, I'm not going to fault the developers completely for that because sometimes it's just a matter of learning the code and learning like the process behind VR development. Like, how are we going to get people into the game? I'm gonna say this now, and then like in a future game, I'm gonna do it, and then I'm gonna get called out on it. But
Somebody's gonna be like,
ignore it.
"Hey, you
Yeah, just
remember when you
ignore that.
said
Yeah,
that?" There's
yeah, yeah. So
Cutscenes are like a big like pet peeve of mine where well, it's like if you ever like take control of the player in VR
mhm,
is like a big like pet peeve like no of mine because the in normal game development you can have cutscenes and like just have the players start to move around do their own thing like animate themselves and whatever and like you just have hands off your controller but in VR like you are the person and so if you get moved or if you get locked and you can't move then you're like it just like really brings you out of the immersion. And
yeah,
so I think Half-Life Alyx does it pretty well because like the first like couple of little scenes when they're like introducing you to like different people, they'll just like lock you in a little room while like the person's doing their like little monologue. But then
yeah,
like you can still like walk around and grab things and do stuff, but like you're
yeah.
like in a cut scene, but it's like you're just like kind of locked off into this little room.
Yeah, even the character, the world in that game reacting to you moving around, I think does a great job. Because in the beginning of the game, spoiler, there's a scene where you're in that elevator, which is like a tight box, and you're in front of an armed guard with a stun stick. And if you get too close to him, he'll jolt you back with a stun stick. Like that's the type of thing that puts immerses you still in the world, but gives you a nice sort of game style excuse as to why you can't move into the scene that's happening in front of you. I'd say that yeah,
Exactly.
that's a great great example of a developers making like that type of scenario of immersion.
Yeah, you have to get a little bit creative because you can't just have your little movie scene anymore.
There was some thoughts about any resources that you think would be useful for new people. So this is strictly me coming from like still a rookie experience, but like there's a lot of websites available on the internet that sometimes seems like they have the answer you're looking for, but they're not as popular websites. But
Hmm.
they're resources that people use for Unity development for audio assets, textures, prefabs, just general modeling. That can help them, but it's just a website they might not be aware of. So I don't know if you have any like resources or anything that you would suggest aside from like Unity Learn that might be useful resources for people who are new, in terms of bringing in assets to help them, or even just resources that might help with like code.
Right. Yeah. So like YouTube's the obvious one that you go to, and the honestly my favorite channel is Brackeys. Like even though they don't post anymore, like there's still a bunch of really good tutorials. There's like a whole C sharp kind of like course, I guess, little mini course in there about how to make like some C sharp, how like the different words and elements and how those work. Like lots of different like like we were talking about earlier, like the research questions that you ask and that are like very
Mm,
specific. Um and a lot of people discount Unity Learn. Unity Learn's actually like really good. There's a lot of really good like it's all like it used to be paid, but now it's all free. So it's just like a bunch of free courses specifically about Unity stuff, and you can go pretty in depth. They've got a lot of like even just like you know super detailed optimization lessons and C sharp again, you know shaders, lots of like new animations, lots of things. I mean, my favorite so that like that's a good spot to learn, and then like after you kind of learn and know how things work, the Unity documentation is usually pretty good about
mhm,
like once you have like a question, just want to look up a specific thing. Um, but as far as like getting assets and whatnot, well, the Unity asset source is just like my that one's like my just consistent go to
yeah.
because it's there's just so much on there, and it's like all in one spot. There's like a bunch of like little 3D modeling like websites that I have. So like off the top of my head, there's Sketchfab, no Sketchfabs, might be Sketchfab, Turbo Squid, Free 3D, um, and then for audio, there's freeaudio.org,
Free
freesound.org.
sound. There you go.
Uh, trying to think of all these off the top of my head. Freesound.org or Epidemic Sound for like a paid like subscription option where you get like a bunch of sound effects and
Oh, Sound Bible.
oh, Sound Bible's good. Um, let's see. There's some texture ones. I think I posted a video about this like a year ago. I need to update it. About like where I was like, what do you need for VR development, and like kind of
Hmm.
hit a lot of these little like websites and things. Um, but yeah, honestly, my kind of go to is like if I have a question about something and a quick YouTube search won't like help me, I'll go to Unity Learn and see if there's like a video about that, and then usually that'll have it, and if not, I'll just like go to documentation and kind of figure it out. Um,
Hmm.
or if I want to get like an asset, usually it's Unity Asset Store, and if it's not like specifically there, I'll try one of these other like 3D modeling like sites that you can just get 3D models off of. Um, and then audio is usually just freesound.org. There's a lot of just like pretty decent stuff on there.
Yeah.
Audio is just audio.
Hey, it makes a big impact. That's what I learned on
That
the
is
game
true.
dev course. I got to the audio section and my game has never sounded uglier.
it
It's a
is
work in progress.
it's a huge impact, especially when you're making games. When you add audio for the first time, you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
it's like so much more immersive. Like it's just like a whole sense, I guess.
Let's see. I was on the chat. There was some recommendations which I'd hope to pass off to newcomers if they happen to hear this. But there's like 3 points that I've noticed during like my studies as like a newbie into the game development. The biggest one that I've done a lot of is just taking notes of my successes. There's in math, the feeling you get when you like solve an equation and you're giddy about solving that, you get that sort of same feeling in code if you write successful code and it executes well in Unity. But as you're feeling giddy about it, just pause and then get a snapshot of that code, put it into any like note-taking app that you use. It could be OneNote, it could be some other one. I use Windows, but any note-taking app that's pretty useful for you, get a snapshot of it, write down the situation that you were in. So in this case, I needed to make my character move. So I lay out what happened in the code. So this method did this. I used an if statement to say if I click this button, it's supposed to do that event that I asked it to do, and just make sure you have that laid out because when you do new projects and you need those fundamentals, the more you can refer back to those successes that you did, you'll know how to alter them and then just improve upon them even more. And then that just solidifies it more into your mind, those typical properties of your code. And it helps build your understanding of the code terminology and of the experience behind it. Um, in terms of this second note I have, we talked about it a lot in the call, but just don't get overwhelmed by the assets available in the asset store. There's a bunch of them. But if you feel very confident you can make your own assets, go ahead, but don't let that detract you from getting the fundamentals of your learning out of the way, especially because it might feel very good to wanna make it your own assets, but it's a reality check really quick that it's a learning opportunity as opposed to trying to get a game out immediately. So the more you can build up your knowledge behind it and use those resources provided to you, the better off I think you would be, with understanding things further down the line when you do decide to make your own assets,
And it's so easy
including
to get sidetracked.
yeah. Yes. With the last point, as a more of like a vulnerable moment in terms of new stuff is focus on your progress for your work. You might see in a lot of communities people posting their progress, and it's completely fine to celebrate that others are making progress on their projects. Just don't let yourself compare too strongly to those projects and start thinking like, oh, they're at this point and I'm not, like, am I doing something wrong? Everyone's got different strengths and weaknesses with development. At this point, I feel like I'm split between being better at design and code, but I wouldn't know. I've been trying both to figure that out. So just take different amount of time than other people if you need to. But what matters is that at the end, if you accomplished it, then you did it. All right. Don't use other people's metrics of time to dictate how you get your stuff done. If you feel proud of it, then you did the work that you're supposed to do. And you can hold your head up high. Sorry for the cheesy bit.
No, that's awesome. It's so easy to like compare yourself to like what other people are doing or how fast they're learning. And you're everybody's, the typical cliche, everybody's on their own path, but it's
Mhm.
it's just very true and everyone learns, differently and at different speeds. So don't get intimidated by people who are a few steps ahead of you or, following a little bit different approach and learning things a little bit faster. It's like,
Mhm.
you'll get it if you're just consistent. Like, as long as you're consistent, I think you'll be fine. Everybody'll you'll be able to learn.
Absolutely.
Wait, anything else? Any like questions for me or anything like that?
The main resource one, the main question I had for you is the resources available. I have this whole list of stuff that I was gonna talk or that I did talk about, so I'm like fresh out of questions here.
Nice.
But I mean, he's you've got your Discord available, as well as very impressive people on that Discord that know more than I do. So
Yeah,
I'm
there's a
sure they'll be
lot
able to
of
answer questions.
I can't take a lot of credit for the like, I
Yeah,
made the Discord, but I honestly don't participate in it as much as I should. There's a lot
yeah,
of a lot of my moderators and a lot of just people who come and hang out are like
hmm,
super nice and like contribute on there and answer a bunch of questions, and it's
yeah.
it's a pretty good community.
So yeah, that's really all I got for you. I mean, it's great having the opportunity to talk. I just wanted people to get an idea of a perspective from a newcomer since
Yeah, this has
it's
been great.
exciting. It's exciting. It's a hobby that I'm really excited to get into on a in an industry that seems really new. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn, and it's just a piece of tech that has existed since like the '90s, but now it's getting really good.
Yeah, we're like finally in the next like 5 years. Like if you're getting into it like between now and 5 years, like you'll be in that like early stage and be able to easily make a bunch of money. Are you gonna post your progress on like social media and stuff? Where can people find you and keep up with
You know, that's a good
the pirate
question.
game?
That's a good question. I should start setting up some social pages to at least track my own progress. Even if only my mom visits, that's all I care.
Social media is your
But
resume
yeah,
is.
yeah. I mean, right now I just have all the typical pages of like LinkedIn or my Discord ID if you wanted to like send a DM or like Justin said, I'm pretty active in the Discord. Mostly because I have the notifications popping off on my phone. So it's fun to see, but there's channels that they have of like weekly progress of people showing off of their work. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to see how people have done stuff. And eventually you'd see me posting there, but give me like a few months.
You gotta learn a little bit more.
Yeah, let me hit my ceiling before I start posting.
There you go. Well, it's been a pleasure to chat. Thanks for being willing to jump on and hang out.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.